Welcome to another Buffalo Bills Victory Monday edition of no longer the Tim Graham Show. We finally got some graphic elements in over the weekend. Let me introduce you now to what will be known as TGAF.
And what does that stand for, Tim?
Tim Graham and Friends. People will add whatever abbreviations they want, but TGAF is now a thing. TGAF brought to you by more letters, CTBK, accountants and business consultants in Amherst. But yeah, we're here with Jonah Bronstein and Matthew Fairburn, the Fs of TGAF. And we're joined also by Jerry Sullivan. We're going to talk some Bills in the no frills version, the Monday version of the TGAF podcast. And a fascinating game yesterday, the type of game that you're used to seeing the Bills lose. I'll be honest, I think I'm finally being won over in that I expected the Bills to actually win the game yesterday. And when Josh Allen threw the fourth down incompletion and the Bills were bailed out by the defensive pass interference call, I was a bit surprised because there's just something in me that's starting to be conditioned that these guys are going to pull it out, which is – and, Jerry, I'll ask you because you experienced it way more than any of us, and I was in Cleveland at the time, so I wasn't really living and dying with those 1990s Buffalo Bills. I don't know that there's a comparison to be made. They went to 4 straight Super Bowls. But just that mood of even when behind or facing some turbulence that these Bills seem to be able to figure it out.
Yeah, and they've done it the last 2 years. I mean, throughout the playoff game, of course. They've made comebacks. Look, I grew up a Red Sox fan, and I came to know there weren't curses. There was bad management, and they didn't have speed and pitching and defense, and that's why they lost these games. Well, the Bills never had the quarterback. All those years when they had these harrowing losses, sure, they had an occasional capable quarterback, but not someone who could lift them above their own misfortunes on the road. And it was common for them to have a great defensive effort, and the offense didn't show up. Now, like a lot of teams, and I know I'm rambling here, but the teams with the great quarterbacks, they won games with average defenses. They're now trending that way, where you've got an offense that can lift you on a day when the defense doesn't play well. So I guess it's a long way of saying they weren't cursed, and there's a reason that Bills always expected the worst to happen, because they had the fewest passing attempts in the league over an 8-year period.
And it reminds me of some thoughts that I've had over the last couple of weeks when, and justifiably so, Bills fans, especially the last couple of generations, haven't been here before. They haven't experienced this. So to see Josh Allen play, not just competent, but above average, very good, but to say, well, he's MVP candidate, right? I mean, this guy's got to be the front runner for MVP. And then you take a look at the stats around the NFL and what Russell Wilson's doing, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes.
Scoring as a whole is up.
Everything is up. And so finally the Bills fans are seeing that they have somebody who's actually in the conversation. They're not obsolete anymore. They're actually caught up with the rest of the NFL, the good NFL quarterbacks. They've caught up. And I think that is just kind of just a reminder of how bad the quarterback play has been when people are going ape doo-doo over 3 straight 300-yard games. And yes, there have been some historical aspects within Josh Allen's, stats, but he's finally catching up. Or the Bills, I should say, are finally catching up with really good teams and offenses and looking like you're supposed to look in today's NFL.
They're winning because of the quarterback, not in spite of the quarterback, which I think it's been a long time since that happened, and especially with this group. It was sort of like last year it was the Bills could be as good as Josh Allen lets them be, and now he's bringing them along where they're struggling in other areas that were strengths of this team previously.
Well, and it finally feels like, and this is so refreshing, that we can actually compare Josh Allen to other quarterbacks in the NFL and not E.J. Manuel, J.P. Lossman, Trent Edwards. It used to always be, he's the first one since this to throw for 300 yards, or he's so much better than what they've had in the last 20 years. Like, who the hell cares about those guys? Like, you should be – I've long thought it's the same thing with Sean McDermott. You compare him to all these Dick Duran and all these coaches that didn't do anything. Like, forget the last 20 years. Like, that was an abysmal stretch of football of really historic proportions. Start comparing your team, your quarterback, your coach to the rest of the league, and now we can actually have those conversations. Like, Josh Allen, is he having a better season than Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson to this point? Or, there's a historical element to it, certainly, but it's also just refreshing to finally have the conversations about the rest of the league and not have people immediately reflexively jump to, well, take it easy. He's better than anything we've had lately. Like, no, start, as Sully likes to say, raise the bar, and they're now at the big boy table.
All right, say the
and
name.
having conversations like that.
Now you're comparing him to who? Jim Kelly.
Right.
The guy he was supposed to live up to. You want a stat? First Bills quarterback since Jim Kelly to throw for 303 straight games. Only quarterback since Jim Kelly did it in the Super Bowl years, I think 91, to have 1,000 yards passing in 3 straight games. That's kind of what people were looking for, wasn't it?
But
Yeah,
let's not, as Matthew
start-
Fairburn just said, let's not totally forget the past 20 years, because there's something about the past 20 years that is in play, I'm sure, with media coverage, or it should be at least a little bit, and definitely within fans' minds, is the Bills have been 3-0 before. So they were 4-1 under Duran, or whatever it was, 5-2. They were 4-1 under Chan Gailey. They were, there's also, I think, a reluctance, and that's where we're saying now, go ahead and start having your imagination captured a little bit. But should fans totally forget? How much of a foot should we keep in the past when it comes to, all right, let's just hang on a little bit here?
I would say,
and actually, one more point, because I'm going to leave you to talk about this. This is the no frills version of the Tim Graham Show. I forgot to turn off the sprinkler. My backyard's now being flooded. I'm going to excuse myself, but you guys, please continue.
Sully, maybe you can correct me here, but I would say you almost don't have to compare or get worried that the other shoe's going to drop, right? Because of what's happened to the Bills over the last 20 years. But I also would caution people to recognize the way that quarterback play is talked about and the way quarterback development happens in the NFL. Look, for the first few years of Josh Allen's career, it was about determining whether he was good, whether he was at a level where you would continue on with him as your quarterback. And that's a starting point. When you have a young quarterback, that's the way the conversation goes. Then you get into this tier of like Jay Cutler, Matt Stafford, Matt Ryan, Carson Wentz a few years ago, where they've had the moment, they've had the breakout, they've had the stretch of play, and you have to have the ongoing conversation. Quarterback play is not linear. The progression does not automatically always go up. And I think when you think about it in that context, that's more where you would think, like, have a little bit of cautious optimism here. But I don't think you need to have cautious optimism because of Trent Edwards per se.
You can throw for 4,700 yards and be 9-7. Those guys, I was thinking of Stafford when you started to talk about other things that can happen. And the defense is a concern. If it's average, they could still be good, but people want to believe that it's an elite defense. And now you have a quarterback who could be elite. That's where you have to kind of back up and say it's hard to sustain defense. And this is defense. There are some trouble signs, and they faced one really good offense and not looked good.
But
Yeah,
Jerry,
it doesn't look like a good defense right now. That's for sure.
Jerry, what did you make of some of the plays in the fourth quarter from Josh Allen, where it did look a little bit like the past, maybe that Houston playoff game where he's throwing the ball sideways, throwing it out of bounds, making some questionable decisions? He did come back and make the big plays at the end, but do you have any concerns about some of those mistakes creeping back into his game?
Yeah. I mean, I said they should have put out flashers and orange cones. It was like driving by an accident on the highway. And like, if not for interference call, it was very questionable. We'd having a different conversation today. He looked exactly like the guy that was Bizarro, according to some national observers during that Houston game.
Matthew Fairburn was that national observer.
Was that you that said Bizarro? Well, I've been quoting
He's
you.
the Bizarro Fitz.
I quote him a lot. And it's charming to say, well, we like that. I mean, we like that part of Josh. We'll take it. But you want to get that out of him. I mean, you can't just be wildly laddering the ball like it's 8th grade football in those moments. And that's a little concerning that's not gone. And the quarterback standard has been raised in this league. I mean, some of the stuff Wilson's doing is like, whoa. And now it's great to have a guy who's charting that way, but you still want the more polished, mature version of that. And maybe they were a couple years away.
Aaron Rodgers, that's another name I should have mentioned earlier when I was saying, hey, let's hang on about Josh Allen for MVP. There are a lot of candidates out there. And also to be reminded, and it's kind of been a little bit of a talking point because people are incredulous to think back that and over his career, Russell Wilson has never received a single MVP vote. So the standard that you need to play at to be MVP is more than 3 or 4 games. But, you see a lot of stats about Josh Allen, and Jonah brings up the point about the playoff game in Houston. You're seeing a lot of these stats. One was his last 13 games, what his stats are, last 13 full games. That's regular season. What that does is conveniently remove that disastrous second half performance against Houston. We did see reminders of that yesterday. For a couple of series in the fourth quarter yesterday, Josh Allen was melting down. And while that is a criticism, here's some praise because he found a way to get himself out of it. Like he unscrewed his brain, however he was screwed into the turf thinking-wise and complaining about a horse collar tackle when he was still in the pocket. The ball is still live, and he is bitching to the ref about a penalty, and the ball still can be recovered. And, totally, Cam Newton, didn't he get crushed for something similar a couple of years ago? So, yeah, Josh Allen gets a penalty, sets up the Rams for a fairly easy go-ahead touchdown, but he found a way out of it, which it's amazing that he's able to do. That's a trait that he seems to have of being able to just bail himself out.
What do you guys think of, and I don't want people to misconstrue this as me saying this is why Josh Allen is having the success he's having, but I think a small part of it, particularly yesterday, with what you're talking about, Tim, the fact that he was able to, as things were completely unraveling on him, pull it together and control his emotions somehow, which he did not do in Houston. And then you look at the trend around the league with offenses being up. Empty stadiums, I wonder if there's any element of that is calming Josh Allen down. What was the line we heard from him last year about how he would get too excited and get too amped up? And you saw that in trying to make every play. It seems like the lack of a crowd, would play in favor of the offenses, and that seems to be the case around the league. I don't know that Aaron Rodgers goes into New Orleans and does what he does last night if there's fans in the Superdome. But even at home, for a guy like Josh Allen, not having that crazy home crowd can help you find that calm, or at least bring it back when it gets a little bit out of control. And I think that's helping him. And maybe it's something that as he realizes the way that he can control his emotions with no fans, when fans get back in there, it'll be a skill he's developed maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's easier to think and also communicate with the sideline. And there's not as much of a din, and I think that can help. But of course, that makes it a little equally concerning that it happened to him in the first place. But I was thinking about this, Jonah, earlier when we talked about scoring up. Where it's also up in the NBA playoffs, and I think it's the same. Some of the same things are there. No one's yelling defense unless it's phony, and I think it's easier to sustain scoring in the NBA right now. I don't know what you think, but certainly it's a factor in the NFL.
Well, I think that last pass interference call on the Rams was similar to a lot of the fouls we see in the NBA where, if the offensive player is impeded in any way, it's a foul or now I think it's defensive pass interference. And that's an overall, I wouldn't say a problem, but something that I don't think is a good part of the game, even though it leads to increased scoring.
One thing that was brought up with Joel Stanishevsky on Friday, if you didn't have a chance to see TGAF on Friday or listen to it, go back and check it out because it was some betting analysis that you can use, some thoughts, not just pertaining to week 3 games, but until Las Vegas adjusts. And it has to do with backdoor covers. When you have teams playing prevent defense late in the game, like the Bills were doing against the Miami Dolphins, and there is no crowd to pressure the quarterback, to drown out the snap counts, to make them go to a silent count, it makes it that much easier for the offense to operate late in the game when within the game confines, there's nothing at stake. But on the betting slip, and you're looking at covering. So anyway, just another thing to think about, because I think that is absolutely true, that the crowd noise, the elimination of it is making it easier for these offenses to operate. But the quarterbacks still have to make the throws, and there's some amazing throws being made out there today. Josh Allen's right up there. Before we get to defense, and I hate to, everybody wants to talk about the fun stuff and how entertaining the game was, and I get that. But the reason the finish was so entertaining is because the Bills came this close from having would have been the worst collapse in Bills history and would have been the greatest comeback in Rams history. But before we do that, I want to remind you that Shampo, Travis, Besaw, and Kirshner is a leading accounting firm with a growing team of accountants, business consultants, and they have roots in Amherst. CTBK pairs every project with a focus on a human connection between its team and the client. For assurance, accounting, taxes, litigation support, advice on acquisitions and mergers, and maybe soon we'll acquire Jerry Sullivan. We'll find a way. I'll maybe need to consult with CTBK on the best way to acquire this talent or perhaps merge with it. CTBK is available and ready to solve any issue your business faces. For a consultation or a request for a quote, call 716-630-2400. Once more, that's 716-630-2400. CTBK, over a quarter century of proven accounting and business excellence for Western New York and beyond.
I'm always good for a quote.
You are. I think their quotes are a little different. It's not like Daryl Talley. Hey, who is the greatest quote? If you were working on a story, and this person could speak on any topic, somebody that you've interviewed in the past. So let's say, you're obviously, anyway, I won't cloud it. But if you're working on any given story and you needed one person and that person was going to be knowledgeable on the topic, who would it be that you went to for a quote?
Well,
Daryl Talley would have to be up there.
Talley would be up there. Kent Hull would be up there. LaFontaine. But I know I'm probably forgetting somebody where it's like, oh, you always get it from this guy.
George Wilson,
the senator, was always good, but you wouldn't get like real controversial stuff. Actually, the best person I've talked to in all of my retrospectives on the Bills was Kenny Davis. When it depends sometimes on what you're looking for. Him talking about the emotion of being a Bill, being there on game day, the crowd, the weather, and everything, he was the best. But I'll get off and then I'll remember something that I'd forgotten. But I wanted to talk about the defense and the fact that a really good coach stuck with the run yesterday because that's our identity. But also I'm wondering, Matt, I'll give this to you, that it was a guy who seemed to think the Bills can be run on, that has watched some of their film last year and previous years under McDermott where they can get gashed up the middle, and if that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, it certainly looks like it's going to be a problem. I mean, they're without Starr in the middle of that defense after he opted out. So that's one, tangible thing you can point to that they're missing. They were without the linebackers in Miami, but both of them were back yesterday. And Tremaine Edmonds was sort of hemming and hawing after the game. Maybe he was banged up. Maybe he wasn't quite himself. But I don't know. If you're on the field, you got to be judged accordingly. I mean, and I do think there's an element of Sean McVay being, one of the sharpest offensive minds in the game. He's, really good at scheming things up, making adjustments. And he frankly schooled Sean McDermott and Leslie Frazier in the second half. They didn't have any answer for what they were doing. And part of it was the running game, but part of it was Jared Goff finding, they were picking on matchups. They were picking on Taron Johnson. They went after Levi Wallace a few times. He did get an interception, but I think the defensive line in terms of, run stopping has been pretty underwhelming through 3 weeks. And these linebackers, while Matt Milano played great yesterday, Tremaine Edmonds, I think, left something to be desired. And if he's not quite right, or maybe there's just some regression happening across the board. Jerry Hughes hasn't been quite himself through 3 weeks, or not the usual Jerry Hughes that we've seen. I don't know. You talked about it. There's a lot of challenges in sustaining high-level defensive play. We knew this. We've talked about it. People kind of brushed it off and thought this defense was immune to it, and clearly they're not through 3 weeks. They also weren't tested that often last year or over the last few years by legitimate top-flight offenses, and we're seeing what happens when they are, I guess.
3 quarterbacks they played last year rated in the top 22 in the league at the end of last year. Just a number, but it's a little tougher this year, I'd say, and it's going to get tougher.
Well, another number.
Bills fans will tell you that it's because they play against the Bills. That's why their ratings are so lousy.
That's true.
One out of 16 games is what's really weighing down those.
The Denver quarterback, he was so memorable. Whoever played for them last year, and all those other backups. Tim,
I was just going to say the number. First off, Jerry, your radio hosting skills are still sharp because you have been working everybody in here. You have been the Ernie DiGregorio of this podcast so far. You've given it to Jonah. You've given it to Matthew. You've noticed that I had something to say there. You're kicking it back to me. I think maybe you should be acquiring TGAF. You should call.
Gotta go there.
You should call Shampoo, Travis, Besaw, and Kirshner for an acquisition of this show. Ernie D. What is that? Is that from a newspaper?
Yeah, it's Buffalo Evening News. I'll tell a story here. One of our favorite people, Bob DeCesare, brought that. He lured me to attend a benefit once, a golf benefit, which is so hard. But I actually paid, which is rare. And that was one of the prizes he wanted someone who would bid on that. And I was the only person to bid. And I was thrilled. Yes, Ernie D is from my home state of Rhode Island, my favorite athlete of all time. Not my favorite.
Did you end up paying for that?
$45, I think. I was going to talk about a quote. I covered Charles Barkley in his early days in the NBA, so it's hard to beat Charles as a young guy. He would never not give it up. He was just the best. I call him in his hotel room sometime, and he'd talk to me.
Calvin Murphy, you ever talk to him, Jerry?
I did. And Calvin's a little nuts, but I think I interviewed him once after a benefit game, old timers game, and he played like it was for like $1 million. I mean, he played real hard. Yeah. And he was very proud that Calvin could talk.
So the stat that I was going to bring up regarding quarterback play, upcoming, the Bills have Las Vegas this week. In 2 weeks, it's Tennessee in Nashville, and then Kansas City at home. So teams that are 7-1 right now going into Kansas City's game tonight, and have played in those 8 games, have scored at least 31 points 5 times. So one of those, I mean, everybody is scoring. So even the Las Vegas Raiders, you think, well, Derek Carr, come on, man. They scored, I think, 34 points in each of their first 2 games. The Titans have scored 30 points in back-to-back games. And Kansas City's Kansas City. They actually are one of the teams that did not post a 30-point game in through one of their 2 so far. So Bills defense does not have any easy outs coming up until their junior varsity rematch with the New York Jets at the Meadowlands in Week 7. So very tough test. It's amazing how the conversation has shifted among us 4 and really everybody out there. Everybody's kind of feeling okay about Josh Allen, even though we're only 3 games into the season, and it's the defense, the supposed backbone of Sean McDermott's team, is maybe going to make you kvetch a little bit here over the course of the season.
Kvetch, good word. Josh has only run 4 times in each of the last 2 games. If I'm talking too much, well, this is my segment, right? You other 2 are gonna hang around.
Yeah, well, we have Joe Licata coming up too. I guess I didn't even tease that.
Someone who really knows football.
Joe might drop in on you before you take off, Jerry. But
I'm having fun.
You were going to say about running. I think it is lent almost directly to what the hell was Brian Dable thinking with these RPOs while up 21 points in the second quarter against the Jets on opening day and Josh Allen's 2 fumbles. I'm almost positive there's been a mandate out there of, all right, let's knock that off. And the reason they can afford to do that is the offense is doing so well. Lee Smith a healthy scratch through 2 games, 1 play, 1 touchdown. Tyler Kroft goes into yesterday's game, 0 receptions through the first 2 games, 2 touchdowns. Zach Moss, they don't have him. Didn't seem to matter. Obviously, that Dawson Knox wasn't there didn't seem to matter. John Brown gets 2 targets on the first series, isn't seen or heard from again because of a calf injury. They did it without him. They build this big lead without Stephon Diggs even being a factor in the offense until the 3rd quarter. You don't need Josh Allen to run. If you have all these guys that Brian Daboll has seemed to be really synced up with mentally, it's like a video game aspect. I see the play. I'm going to execute. The play gets executed. Move on to the next one. It's been incredible to watch.
The running backs averaged 5.5 yards per carry yesterday. It's kind of a wonder why they got away from that in the second half. I wanted to ask Matt, there seemed to be some moves and some shuffling on the interior offensive line yesterday. What do you make of that? I wasn't watching closely enough to see maybe why they made some of those changes, but how much is that related to maybe them not going to that ground game in the second half?
I feel like the offensive line changes are basically an indictment on Quentin Spain and the way that he's playing, and partly it feels like thinking ahead and planning ahead for the return of John Feliciano. They want to find a spot for him in those, 5 starting 5 up front. He's most comfortable at right guard, it seems. That was his spot. And working Cody Ford at left guard gives them a lot of options. If he can play left guard and Feliciano steps back in at right guard, and you've got Darrell Williams playing as well as he is at right tackle, it's a pretty good spot to be in. And it's also not a bad spot to be in when Quentin Spain, who, hadn't played great, but didn't allow a sack last year, that's the guy that's waiting to come in. Or Brian Winters, who played some right guard yesterday, is waiting to come in. Or even Tyan Secchi, who actually had to come in because Deion Dawkins got hurt, a guy who played half of your right tackle snaps in 2019, is waiting to come in if one of your tackles goes down. It's kind of uncommon depth on the offensive line, and it allows them to do things like you're talking about, shuffle things up, create competition, and put guys on notice. Say, Quentin Spain might start on a lot of offensive lines around the league, but if he's not playing that well, they have the options to move pieces around and try to get better play. I'm not an expert in offensive line play. There were a lot of free rushers yesterday. I think sometimes Josh Allen makes the offense look worse the way he hangs on to the ball and tries to extend plays, but I also think he makes them look a lot better sometimes by making those free rushers miss. So I think the offensive line is still a work in progress, but they have the luxury of having way more pieces there than a lot of teams do.
Well, I am an expert on offensive line. No, I'm not. Sorry. You mentioned uncommon depth. That's a big issue with this. Not an issue. That's a reality. And wow, when you miss the playoffs 17 years in a row in this league, you're supposed to have cycles where you have depth because your top young players are in their first contracts. They're not paying the quarterback, the star linebacker, the running back. And they have the difference now is they have a good general manager. He understands talent, and they're not drafting like running backs in an era when the game is going to a passing game. So good job there, but they're supposed to have uncommon depth.
They also, a lot of what they've done on the offensive line has been through free agency. Deion Dawkins was a draft pick of Sean McDermott in 2017. Cody Ford was a second-round pick in 2019. Darrell Williams was a free agent signing this year. Mitch Morse, they broke the bank to bring him in. Quentin Spain was a free agent signing. Feliciano was a free agent signing. Brian Winters, who they brought in, they signed when the Jets cut him this offseason. So I think Brandon Beane's also done a good job of kind of to your point, like at some point the cycle is supposed to go that way. You have all these young players on cheap contracts. You have a quarterback on a cheap rookie contract. Identify what the problems are early in his development and do what you can to put the infrastructure in place so that he can develop properly. The offensive line was the focus in 2018. It continued to be a focus in 2019. Getting Stephon Diggs has completely changed his passing game. Same with John Brown and Cole Beasley. You can't make those additions. You cannot spend that much money in free agency if you haven't completely gutted your roster the way that they did and drafted a lot of guys. Like you said, they're going to have to extend guys. They already started with Trey White and Deion Dawkins. And so then your free agency spending is not going to be as aggressive. You're going to have to get rid of some of the guys you brought in at some point. That's where the drafting and the finding values is going to really be tested, because it's easy to do it when you've got all the money in the world and a bunch of draft picks to bring in, young guys on cheap deals. So Brandon Beane's really aced the first part of his tenure as general manager, but the challenge in sustaining it is a different one entirely.
But the Bills did have the luxury of a lot of continuity on that offensive line, and some of these shuffles with the guards disrupts that. And, I wonder what you're losing in terms of continuity if you're trying to, find the perfect mix of guys mid-season.
Yeah, it's probably why they're doing it. Sean McDermott mentioned no preseason. These early games, they're able to, they kind of have to move some pieces around to find the best ones. And yesterday was tough because, Aaron Donald obviously had a great game. He seemed like he was in the backfield a lot, especially in the second half. But it's hard to judge, Cody Ford and Brian Winters on how they did against Aaron Donald. Not that many people do very well against him. So the continuity aspect is a fair point, but I think when you bring in Feliciano, you've got Feliciano and Morse having played together, Dawkins and Ford pretty familiar with each other. So it's still more than a lot of teams have. And I've always thought you'd rather have the best five than the familiar five. You'd rather have the right coach, quarterback, coordinator combo than the one you had the year before, just for continuity's sake. So talent and ability and depth is a lot more important than continuity.
Yeah,
So Jerry, you have the reputation of being the pessimist, the cynic. You've been writing some incredibly positive articles regarding the Bills, which is not unusual. I think people view that as unusual. Anybody who actually follows your work knows that when things are going well, it's reflected in your work. But a chance for you to speak in regard to that about these Bills and your general state of optimism regarding this season. Let's just talk about 2020, because I think with Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott in their roles, we generally view this as a team that's building in the right direction long term. But what about 2020? Where are you in terms of cup half full, cup half empty?
Well, the cup is filling up. I did say 9-7. I picked them for 10 wins last year, and because I thought their cycle was coming, their schedule was pretty easy. And this year I thought they might take a step back because I didn't think the defense would be as good. And I wasn't sure about Josh Allen, but after 3 weeks of historic play, I'm back. I would say I'm really optimistic about them. I see them as a Super Bowl contender in the same way that a lot of teams have been, with really good offenses and average defenses. So they could even be better than that. Thanks, by the way, on my reputation. I mean, I always thought that I might have had not enough of middle ground. I was the guy who really was critical when things were bad, and I really tried to capture the feeling of the fans when things were going well. I would mention the fans a lot, and when things were going badly, I was telling them how they ought to feel. And it's kind of like with a teacher. You tell the teacher your kid's doing great and they love you, and then you tell them he's got a D and they think, well, no, it's got to be, can't be his fault. So anyway, I think they're trending up. They're fun, but 17 years missing the playoffs, there was plenty to criticize. And it also, for someone like me, made me properly skeptical. I don't want to be the guy who's ahead of the curve after what I've seen. And I also would reflect a lot of, how many times did I write this sentence? How much more can Bills fans take? And then they would blow a game like that Dallas game, but that's 15, 14 years ago. So it's kind of a new era, and maybe it's time to be properly optimistic within reasons. And the fact that they have a modern offensive NFL team, and it's fun, and they seem to have the franchise quarterback. Let's go. I would tell people, how could you not be negative when a team misses the playoffs 17 years in a row? And they put 80-year-old guys in to be general manager, and guys, bring guys out of the back room and throw in a promotions guy like Russ Brandon. Oh, really? What did you want me to do? All right. Joe, how you doing, man? Big Bills fan. Knows his football.
I'm doing well. How you guys doing?
How's timing?
It's good. It's an interesting year. I mean, we're here 5 days a week, and we have to practice social distancing and do all that fun stuff, and it's been interesting.
For those who aren't watching on
I'm running the
YouTube,
show again.
Joe Licata from Timon is joining us, the former University at Buffalo quarterback who's now the coach at Timon and the athletics director, and runs some very successful and efficient quarterbacks camps here in Western New York. You got some announcements going on there, Joe?
Yeah, sorry, that might pop in every once in a while.
We've said no frills. I had to excuse myself from the podcast to go turn off my sprinkler in the backyard because I forgot. So, no sweat. Jerry's on, so you know that he has zero decorum. So don't worry about your announcements. Hey, through a quarterback's perspective, we've been talking about it here, and Jerry just kind of teed it back up here with this offense finally looking like it's caught up with the rest of the NFL and what we've seen from Josh Allen. What's your take on him through 3 weeks?
I'll be honest with you. I thought yesterday was his best game. I thought he played well weeks 1 and 2, but I didn't think he played as well as he could have. I'm cautiously optimistic about it. I think he's doing a lot of great things. I think Dable is doing a great job scheming things up, doing an awesome job calling plays. But I think I caught the end of what Jerry was saying. I think Bills fans should be optimistic, and rightfully so, because they are trending in the right direction. You see this next step that Josh Allen seems to be taking. You see the next step that Dable seems to be taking in his play calling and what he's doing and trusting Josh Allen. But I really do like what I see. I know that a lot of people are concerned about how much they run him. I'm not concerned with the amount of runs. I'm concerned with the finish of his runs. That's part of who he is. That's part of his game. That's what makes him pretty special. And as a quarterback, is his ability to run and extend plays and to have designed runs. That's what makes all those misdirection and the bootleg stuff work, is the amount he runs. So I think that's an okay thing that they're doing with him. He just has to be more careful towards the end of his runs.
And Joe, what do you think as a quarterback? My analysis of the way Josh Allen played yesterday was that he maybe had 45 really good plays and 5 or 6 bad plays, especially towards the end. And how much balance do you need there? I mean, can you play a great game, but if you make a bonehead play at the end that loses your team the game, does that in any way nullify the good plays that you've made before that?
Unfortunately, that's kind of the nature of that position. You could throw for 500 yards, but throw a pick at the end of the game, and everyone looks at you like you're awful. That's kind of the way it works. But
is that fair?
Quarterback gets too much credit when they win and too much blame when they lose. That's just kind of the way it is. Is it fair? Probably not. But again, like I said, it's what you sign up for. But that's what you want. How much fun is watching a Tyrod Taylor ran offense? He's not going to throw 3 picks, but he's never going to win you a game either. I like what they're doing. I'm okay with him taking risks and making some mistakes. That means he has that confidence to make those plays. I'd rather him do it, see that he can't do it, and then not make the play later on, as opposed to just not taking any risks, not taking any chances. He's throwing for 300 yards the past 3 weeks. That's pretty good. He's taking some risks. Calculated risks. Joe,
you might be the perfect person to ask regarding this, because how old are you? 25, 26, 27? Getting away from you. So, but still 27. What's your first memory of a Bills playoff game?
I remember vaguely the Flutie Johnson. Should Flutie play? Should Johnson play?
Okay. Well, right. So perfect. So you have endured your sweet spot of being raised in Western New York, huge football fan. Your sweet spot is constant disappointment.
Yes.
And we talked about it earlier in the show, and I think that a lot of Bills fans and media, I think myself included, but it's getting conditioned out of me. My Pavlovian response to a hot start is, well, it's not going to last.
Right.
Where are you with that from what you've seen so far?
Well, like I said earlier, the words are cautiously optimistic, because I do think they are real. I think that this offense is real. I think that the weapons that they have are competitive with the entire league. You could look at that wide receiver room and you can make an argument that they're the best in the league. I don't know that they are or not, but you can make an argument that they are. They're at least in that conversation. And with the way that the offensive play calling has gone, schemes that they're putting in, the trust that they're putting in with Allen, I mean, you should be – fans should be optimistic. Now, I know there's irrational Bills fans that automatically, you know, first drive of the season, they're saying Super Bowl. I get that. But, you know, to the educated fan, they should be cautiously optimistic.
Well,
Right.
Gabriel Davis certainly adds to the argument they could have the best group if that's your number 4, the way he looked yesterday.
Yeah, I agree. It's a nice and they move him around a lot. And the way that Dable schemes him up and gets them all involved. I mean, Diggs is definitely the alpha, but those other guys are pretty good.
Well, hell, based on statistics and what we saw yesterday, they might have the best tight end group in the NFL.
Except throwing a jump ball to Croft with, you know, that wasn't the best decision in the world. But again, that gets back to those points of taking risks. And you know what? If he's gonna do that once or twice a game, but he's still gonna throw for 300 yards, you got to live with it. I'm fine with it.
Does the quarterback take blame for an interception like that? That may not have even really been an interception.
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know what he's being told in the meeting room. You know, he might have been told, okay, this safety stops his feet for 1 split second. I don't care, throw it. And that's what it looked like to me. He was throwing it no matter what. So I don't know what he was told in the meeting room, but yeah, I mean, it wasn't the best decision in the world, but you're right, it shouldn't have been a pick. But I do think if they would have called it a completion first, they wouldn't have overturned it the other way. So I just think that there wasn't enough evidence either way.
Well, it would have been offensive pass interference, right?
Right. It just would have been created. They would have lost yardage, but
yeah,
it wouldn't have been a turnover.
It should not have been an interception. I agree.
I totally agree, but I can see why they didn't overturn it just because there wasn't enough evidence.
Yeah. Okay, real quick, I'm going to change topics here before we let everybody go because we have a lot of big opinions on this next topic that I'm going to bring up. But I just once more want to remind everybody that Champo, Travis, Besaw, and Kirshner is a leading accounting firm with a growing team of accountants, business consultants, and whatever you need for your business endeavors. With roots in Amherst, CTBK pairs every project with a focus on a human connection between its team and its client. For assurance, accounting, taxes, litigation support, advice on acquisitions and mergers, CTBK is available and ready to solve any issue your business faces. For a consultation or a request for a quote, call 716-630-2400. Again, that's 716-630-2400. CTBK, over a quarter century of proven accounting and business excellence for Western New York and beyond. So the question was raised before we started recording. It got heated between Jerry Sullivan and Jonah Bronstein. I told them to shut up because they needed to save it for the show. Joe Licata, as former co-host of this show, knows all about that. You got to save it for the show. Jerry Sullivan. No, wait, who asked the question? Jerry, did you ask Jonah the question? Go ahead. Just start to tee it up.
Who's the best basketball player of all time? And he said Jordan. And I said, yeah, really? I've said LeBron for like 3 years now. Whenever he almost single-handedly beat the 73-win team and made the block, I'm like, it's all over. Now he's 36, and he's putting up triple-doubles, and he's guarding big men, and just like he did against Tony Parker in the day when they beat San Antonio, he's guarding point guards in the clutch. So I just think the whole package, to me, he's the guy, and I know it's a great argument. There are people that think Jabbar. Joe, what do you think? Okay, go ahead. But you were supposed to reply to that defensive thing.
We all know what Joe thinks. I'll be surprised if Joe has a different answer.
Well, I want to say to Jerry, if Jerry wanted to make an argument for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or Bill Russell, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, I would listen to it because I think a lot of those players get underrated in these discussions. I don't think it's a two-person race here. But haven't seen both of these players' full careers. LeBron James is great and maybe is the second greatest player of all time. But, Michael Jordan beat the Utah Jazz by himself practically when he was 35 years old. LeBron's the same age. LeBron's great. What we saw the other night closing out Denver with his jump shot and just they were not going to lose that game because of the way he played. I don't think he is able to do that reliably enough in the fourth quarters the way Michael Jordan and other great players have done, and sometimes has to defer to his teammates because either his jump shot's not going in or he's afraid to go to the foul line. And he's a tremendous all-around player, maybe the best multi-skilled player ever. But the most important skill in basketball is putting the ball in the hole, especially in the fourth quarter when everybody knows you're the one taking the shot.
Then
And
I guess Kareem is the greatest basketball player of all time.
Right, but I mean, reliably making that shot in the last second on the last possessions, and Michael Jordan is clearly, I think, above everybody else. Maybe Larry Bird. I would argue that Larry Bird in that situation might be the greatest player of all time.
Scoring average and field goal percentage in playoffs is right there with Jordan. So what does he need to do? And guess what?
6 points lower. It's
Jordan
6
making
points
a
lower,
jump shot at 35. A lot of the big shots in the Bulls run were made by little guys because he gave up the ball, and that's great. But there was a very similar thing with LeBron. Every shooter who played with LeBron became a great clutch shooter because why? They were hitting open jump shots all the time. So I should shut up here, but I love this conversation.
It is a great conversation, and there is a lot of opinion based on this. But the facts of it are Jordan's the best player of that era. LeBron's the best player of this era. Who would you take? I would take Jordan. I agree with Jonah's points on his ability to score, his playoff performances, which, Jerry, to your point, he absolutely single-handedly beat arguably the greatest team ever and had great performances in the finals the year before when they did lose it. But I think there is some type of recency bias of just, you see LeBron right now, right this second. I would like to see what he would do in that era, and I would love to see if Jordan was brought up in this era, how much better of a player he would be. I think Jordan scores 40 a game in this era.
Joe, we've had you on, and we've talked about – first off, you were referenced last week's show because Shampoo Travis Besaw and Kirshner's Twitter handle is at CTBK45. So Jonah just said, what's the greatest 45 of all time? Now, I came up with Bob Gibson. Matthew Fairburn had Pedro Martinez. And I said, I know Joe Licata, even though, he's going to say Jordan is the greatest 45 of all time. So we know where your heart is.
I have a Birmingham Barons jersey, thanks to you. Michael Jordan 45.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you about the documentary.
Yeah.
What did your opinion on Jordan change at all? Especially as you're a little older, he really did come off in many ways. I mean, obviously the athlete part of it was one thing,
right,
but he really did come off like an a-hole,
right,
like so many times. So I've been curious, and I haven't had a chance to ask you, has your opinion on him moved at all?
No, I love all those stories. Like, I love the competitive drive stories. That's stuff that from a competitive standpoint and from being in a locker room with guys, like, that's the stuff I miss the most from not playing anymore. And that's the stuff that I've always respected about Jordan are those stories. The punching Steve Kerr in the face story. I love that stuff. He was kind of a jerk. And Jerry, I don't know if it was you that tweeted something. He was the best player. He didn't have to be a jerk, and he still would have been the best player.
I didn't tweet that, but it's nice to have editorial control. Imagine what a jerk he would have looked like if it was a completely objective and independent documentary instead of one that Michael,
That's true.
Let's not put some of the real bad stuff in there. Let's just not even discuss how much better a surrounding cast Jordan had at the end than any of LeBron's teams. And I'm including Anthony Davis because I think he's a little overrated.
I think Anthony Davis might be the best player on the Lakers right now. But you're right. It was a fluff piece. But almost every documentary is when they're showcasing certain people. That's what they want to do. But I thought it was extremely well done. I thought it was awesome. I thought it was great for the kids of this era to see what competition is and what a competitive drive really should look like. Not necessarily should look like, but what a great one does look like. So I thought it was great. But you're right. I'm totally biased. I love MJ. I mean, it could have been awful, and I would have said it was great.
It was also during the pandemic, which made it great. They moved it up. Every episode I was looking forward to a game. That was great.
The reaction on social media was it was the greatest piece of visual art ever produced. Citizen Kane no longer existed.
I thought that was great. I'm very excited to see, in 10, 15 years what the bubble documentary is going to look like too. Because they have cameras everywhere in there. There's going to be some incredible stories about that too. Going back to the documentary though, I was a little mad they didn't expand on the Rodman just leaving story.
What wasn't even mentioned with Rodman, and I covered it because I was waiting to see how they were going to cover it. When Phil Jackson, during that Utah Jazz final, let him leave the team to go to Vegas during the final. And I thought that would have been a really fascinating thing to look at as to how a coach can allow a guy, but that is how they had to manage Rodman. If they didn't let him do those things, there was a chance he could implode the team.
Right.
And maybe
as a coach,
because it wasn't enough about Jordan, but yeah, they totally skipped over that.
right. And it's interesting though, from a coaching perspective, everybody thinks that you should treat everybody equally. You can't. Successful coaches don't do that. You talk to different players in different ways, and his relationship with Jordan I thought was awesome, because he was so, sensei, very easygoing, Phil Jackson, and then Jordan was kind of the enforcer on the leadership side of it. So I thought that they played off of each other very well, which is very similar to why Phil Jackson and Kobe worked too, because Kobe was that same kind of alpha personality who was kind of a hard ass in that scenario, and same with MJ. So I thought that those personalities worked perfectly together.
Well, guys, I have to wrap it up here. We have a hard out today, and normally we don't have to worry about this, but if you're listening to this and you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the TGAF YouTube channel. Also, we're on iTunes. We're on Spotify now, too. That's an update. And we'll be getting on any other platform that you want us to get on. If you have a suggestion, you want us to have our podcast posted there, let us know however you digest your content. What's that, Jonah?
OnlyFans. You ever been on that website, Tim?
No. Do you want? Oh, I know what that is. I'll get on there. Maybe, hey, I know Bella Thorne had some interesting things going on there. Anyway, Jerry, you don't know this stuff, but I want to thank everybody for coming on. This has been a great TGAF, Tim Graham and Friends. I'm on here with 4 of my friends. Great,
got a lot of friends.
Great times. We have and three co-hosts. Jerry was practically a co-host. He was on the show every week back when it was a Buffalo News enterprise. So yeah, this is like a little mini reunion. Thanks for joining me, guys. This has been TGAF, brought to you by CTBK. My thanks to Matthew Fairburn, Jonah Bronstein, Jerry Sullivan, and Joe Licata. Thanks, guys.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.